Nobody believed it at first, but then the word sentenced started spreading online, and everything changed. Domani, T.I.'s son, suddenly at the center of a situation people are calling life-altering. But here's the twist: what actually happened in that courtroom may not be what the internet thinks it is. So is this really the end or just the beginning of something nobody saw coming? Nobody wanted to believe it at first. Because when the first wave of reports started circulating, it didn't sound real. It sounded exaggerated, overblown, like another internet story designed to grab attention and disappear within hours. But then something changed. More sources started speaking, and the tone shifted. Because suddenly, people weren't joking anymore. They weren't debating. They were trying to process something that felt too serious to even fully understand. According to multiple circulating claims, Domani, T.I.'s son, had been sentenced. And not in a minor way. Not a warning, not probation talk, not speculation. A sentence being described online as severe enough that people are already using phrases like life-altering, and in some cases, final in impact. Now pause for a second, because if even part of that narrative is accurate, then this is no longer just entertainment news or celebrity discussion. This becomes something far heavier, something personal, something that doesn't just affect one person but an entire family structure built in the public eye. Because Domani has never been positioned like this before. Out of T.I.'s children, he was always seen as the quieter one, the focused one, the one staying out of noise while trying to build something independent through music and discipline rather than controversy or viral moments. That's why the reaction has been so intense. Because this doesn't match the image people had in their minds. And that gap between perception and alleged reality is exactly what's fueling the shock. The question everyone keeps asking is simple, but unanswered. How does someone like Domani end up in a situation like this? And according to whispers coming from unnamed sources, the answer isn't simple at all. They claim this didn't happen overnight. There wasn't a single moment where everything collapsed at once. Instead, there were signs, small ones at first, easy to miss, easy to dismiss. Less visibility, more distance, a shift in presence that people close to him noticed but couldn't clearly explain at the time. But hindsight changes everything. Because now, those small details are being reinterpreted as warning signs that something bigger was developing underneath the surface, long before the public became aware. And that's where the story becomes more complicated. Because once the alleged incident occurred, things reportedly escalated quickly, but not publicly at first. There was no viral moment, no immediate headlines. Instead, there were behind-the-scenes movements, quiet legal steps, conversations that never reached social media, processes that only become visible once they're far enough along that they can't be reversed. And that's when everything changed direction. From personal to procedural, from private to legal. And once that shift happens, control becomes limited. Not just for the individual involved, but for everyone connected to them. That's where T.I. enters the narrative in a different way. Not as a public figure reacting, but as a father reportedly trying to understand a situation that was already moving through systems beyond his control. Sources suggest he became aware that something serious was unfolding before it reached its final stage, enough to realize intervention might be necessary, enough to try, but not enough to stop what was already in motion. Because once legal processes reach a certain point, they stop responding to influence and start responding only to procedure. And procedure doesn't move based on reputation. It moves based on outcomes. So by the time things reached the courtroom stage, according to the circulating narrative, the situation was already locked in motion. No longer speculative. No longer informal. Structured, official, finalizing. And that's where tension reportedly peaked. Because courtroom moments carry a different kind of silence. Not empty silence, but heavy silence. The kind where everyone in the room understands that what happens next will not be reversible. And according to descriptions being shared online, that's exactly what people felt in that moment. Uncertainty mixed with inevitability. Hope still present but fading. Because even before anything was officially spoken, the atmosphere already suggested that whatever decision was coming would not be light. And when the announcement allegedly came, the reaction inside the room wasn't chaos. It wasn't shouting. It wasn't dramatic collapse. It was something far more unsettling. Stillness. The kind of stillness that happens when people fully realize something has changed permanently. Why? And according to those same unverified accounts, T.I. didn't react immediately. Not because he didn't care, but because the weight of the moment reportedly made immediate reaction impossible. Like processing had to come before response. Because some moments don't allow instant emotion. They force pause. And while the public is still trying to understand what exactly happened, the online environment has already done what it always does: fill in the gaps. Theories, interpretations, assumptions. Some treating it as final, others questioning the validity entirely, and many simply waiting for clarity that hasn't come. But in situations like this, clarity rarely arrives quickly, especially when legal claims, family dynamics, and public speculation all overlap at the same time. Because once a narrative reaches this level of intensity, truth and rumor start to blur together in real time. And that's where things stand now. A situation described as serious enough to reshape perceptions, yet still surrounded by unanswered questions, still lacking confirmation from official channels, still being interpreted through fragments of information rather than full disclosure. And that uncertainty is exactly what keeps it alive. Because people aren't just reacting to what they know. They're reacting to what they fear might be true. And until something concrete breaks that silence, the speculation will continue to grow, shift, and evolve. But one thing is already clear, even without full confirmation. If this story is even partially accurate, then the impact goes far beyond headlines. It moves into something more permanent. Something that doesn't fade when attention moves on. Something that stays. Nobody expected it to reach this point because what started as scattered whispers and unclear reports has now turned into something far more serious. Something people are struggling to fully understand, let alone explain. At first, it sounded like just another rumor cycle online, another story being pushed by speculation and half-truths. But then the details started stacking up. Different sources began saying the same thing in different ways, and suddenly the tone changed completely. According to multiple claims circulating through insider circles, Domani, the son of T, has reportedly been sentenced. Not just involved in a case, not just under investigation, but facing a formal decision that some are already describing in the most extreme terms imaginable. Words like final, life-altering, even goodbye forever started appearing in conversations around the situation. And that's where everything stops feeling like online drama and starts feeling heavy. Because if even part of that language is accurate, then this is no longer just a headline moment. It becomes something far more permanent, something that doesn't just affect reputation, but potentially changes the entire direction of a life. What makes this even more shocking is how Domani has always been perceived publicly. Out of all of T's children, he was the one who stayed relatively grounded, the one who wasn't constantly in the center of controversy. People described him as focused, reserved, and more intentional about music and personal growth than chasing attention. He wasn't the loud one. He wasn't the one making viral moments. He was, in many ways, the calm contrast in a very public family. So the question now hitting everyone is simple but uncomfortable. How did it go from that to this? And nobody seems to have a clean answer. Because insiders are now suggesting this didn't happen overnight. There were signals, subtle shifts, small changes that only made sense in hindsight. Moments where people close to him reportedly noticed a difference in behavior, less visibility, less engagement, a quiet distance that didn't raise alarms at first because nothing seemed obviously wrong. But that's the thing about situations like this. Silence doesn't always mean stability. Sometimes it means something is already in motion. And according to what's being pieced together now, there was an incident that changed everything. Not something public, not something immediately confirmed, but serious enough to trigger attention behind the scenes. From that point on, things allegedly stopped being informal. Processes began, conversations shifted, and whatever was once private started moving into a structured system that no longer depended on personal control. Once that happens, the situation changes completely. Because as it escalates into official channels, it stops being about interpretation and starts being about procedure. Every detail matters. Every statement is weighed. Every piece of information becomes part of something bigger that no longer bends easily to personal influence. And that's where things reportedly became more intense for Domani. Sources suggest that as the process developed, uncertainty turned into pressure. There were moments when outcomes still felt open, still undecided. Still dependent on what came forward next. But at the same time, there were complications, details that didn't fully align, questions that didn't get simple answers. And in systems like this, ambiguity rarely helps the person at the center of it. It usually does the opposite. It builds pressure, and that pressure builds fast. As the hearing approached, the atmosphere reportedly shifted again, not toward clarity but toward tension. People involved, according to those describing the scene, could feel that something irreversible was getting closer, not necessarily in a dramatic way, but in a quiet, heavy way that settles in before major decisions are announced. And when the day finally arrived, the energy inside the room was different. Witness accounts describe it as controlled but emotionally loaded, not chaotic, not loud, but deeply serious. The kind of silence that exists when everyone understands the moment has weight even before words are spoken. T's presence, according to those same accounts, was restrained, observant, focused, not reactive in the way people expect from public narratives, but internally processing what was unfolding in real time. Because moments like this don't hit gradually, they hit all at once. The hearing itself reportedly moved in a structured, procedural way. No theatrics, no emotional buildup, just step-by-step progression toward a final outcome. And as that outcome got closer, the room reportedly grew quieter, as if even sound itself was being held back. And then the sentence was delivered. What followed, according to multiple accounts, wasn't what most people expect in stories like this. There was no immediate chaos, no shouting, no dramatic interruption. Instead, there was silence, a deep, heavy silence that settled over everything instantly. Because whatever the decision was, it landed with weight. And that's when people began repeating the same phrase in different ways, trying to process what they had just heard. Not necessarily as a literal statement, but as an emotional reflection of finality. Something that felt like it closed a chapter rather than opened one. But even after that moment, the story didn't settle. Because as people began trying to understand what led to this point, more fragments started surfacing. Conflicting versions, different timelines, alternative explanations. Some suggesting this stemmed from a private situation that spiraled out of control. Others claiming it was the result of a longer buildup of unresolved tensions that never fully entered public view until now. And then came the uncertainty that made everything more complicated. A circulating message appeared just before the hearing gained attention. Brief, anonymous, and vague enough to avoid confirmation, but impactful enough to spark speculation. It suggested that not everything being discussed reflected the full truth, and that judgment should be paused until more context was understood. But instead of slowing things down, it did the opposite. It intensified curiosity. Because now people weren't just reacting to what was being said. They were trying to figure out what was being hidden. Every detail became a clue. Every contradiction became a question. And every unanswered gap became part of a growing narrative that no one could fully control. And that's where the situation stands now. Not fully explained, not fully confirmed, but heavily discussed, heavily interpreted, and still unfolding through layers of speculation and fragmented information. And the biggest question remaining isn't just what happened in that courtroom. It's what really led there in the first place, and whether the full story has even been told yet. Because in situations like this, silence is never neutral. It always means something. And right now, that silence feels heavier than anything being said online. As the situation surrounding Domani's court appearance continues to circulate, one thing is becoming increasingly clear. Nobody seems to have the full picture. Or worse, the full picture might be something that's being deliberately kept out of public view. Because when Domani finally appeared in court, according to multiple accounts, everything shifted from speculation to reality in an instant. No more theories, no more online interpretations, just a real-life moment unfolding behind closed doors, with real consequences attached to every word spoken inside that room. And the way people describe it is consistent. The atmosphere was heavy, controlled, almost unnaturally quiet. Like everyone present understood this wasn't just another routine hearing. Something about it carried weight before anything was even announced. But then came the first unexpected twist. According to one insider account, the hearing didn't follow a straightforward path. Instead of a clean, predictable process, there were interruptions in flow, moments where details were questioned more deeply than expected, references to information that, according to some descriptions, hadn't even been part of public discussion until that moment. And that's where confusion begins to grow again. Because if new details were being introduced inside that room, then it suggests something important. The public version of this story may not be complete. Then came the decision. And instead of the reaction people usually expect in high-profile cases, noise, emotion, visible chaos, what reportedly followed was something completely different. Silence. Not confusion, not denial, not immediate reaction, just silence. And that silence is what's now echoing across every corner of this conversation, because silence in moments like that doesn't feel empty. It feels loaded, like something just landed that nobody fully knows how to respond to yet. It's that reaction, or lack of reaction, that has people asking the same question over and over again. What exactly was said in that room that isn't being repeated outside of it? Because whatever it was, it clearly carried impact. Enough impact that it shifted the emotional temperature of the entire situation in seconds. But just when people thought they were beginning to understand the outline of what happened, another layer was added, and this one completely disrupted the narrative again. Hours after the hearing, a different version of events started circulating online. Not a clarification, not an update, but a contradiction. And that changed everything. Because suddenly, what people thought was a straightforward legal moment started looking more complicated, almost fragmented, like different pieces of the same story weren't fitting together properly. Some reports suggested key information was missing from the public narrative entirely. Others implied that what people were reacting to might only represent part of a much larger situation. And once that idea takes hold, everything becomes uncertain again. Because if even a portion of the full story hasn't been revealed, then every interpretation so far could be incomplete. That's when a more specific claim started spreading. According to one unverified but widely discussed source, there was a critical moment during the hearing, something unexpected that wasn't part of the original focus. A detail or statement introduced inside the room that allegedly shifted the direction of everything. Nobody is confirming what that moment actually was, but those describing it keep repeating the same phrase. That's when everything changed. And that's where the mystery deepens even further. Because if one unseen detail was enough to shift the entire tone of the hearing, then the real question becomes, what else hasn't been made public? What context is still missing? And why does it feel like every time the story gets closer to clarity, another layer of uncertainty appears? Then came another twist that intensified speculation even further. A post began circulating online, allegedly from someone connected to the situation, suggesting that the situation is far from over, that what people believe to be a conclusion is actually just one part of a much larger unfolding sequence. Short, cryptic, but powerful enough to reignite discussion instantly. And suddenly, the phrase "goodbye forever," which had been circulating loosely in discussions, started to feel different. Less like closure, more like uncertainty disguised as finality. Because if the situation isn't over, then what comes next? That question becomes even more pressing when you consider another major factor: silence from T. No statement, no clarification, no public response addressing the situation directly. And in high-profile situations like this, silence doesn't go unnoticed. It becomes part of the narrative itself. People begin interpreting it, analyzing it, filling in the gaps it leaves behind. Is it strategic restraint? Or is it silence because there are things that cannot yet be said? That uncertainty is now fueling even more discussion than the actual reported events. Meanwhile, the online space continues to fracture into competing interpretations. Some believe the situation has been exaggerated. Others believe only a fraction of the truth has been revealed. And some think the full explanation may never actually surface publicly at all. And that's where a new breakdown analysis entered the conversation. A detailed commentary video began circulating, attempting to map out the timeline of events step by step. But instead of providing clarity, it highlighted something even more concerning: the absence of verified foundational details. No fully confirmed trigger event. No officially clear explanation of what initiated the legal process. No consistent narrative that ties all versions together cleanly. And that gap is exactly what makes this situation so unstable. Because when facts are incomplete, interpretation fills the space, and interpretation spreads faster than confirmation ever can. Now, instead of a single narrative, there are multiple overlapping and G1s. Instead of clarity, there's fragmentation. Instead of closure, there's escalation. And at the center of it all remains Domani, a name now tied to a situation that feels larger, more complex, and far less understood than anyone initially believed. So the real tension isn't just about what was decided in that courtroom. It's about what hasn't been confirmed yet. Because in stories like this, what's missing often matters more than what's visible. And right now, what's missing is exactly what's keeping this entire situation alive. Because once you strip away the noise, one thing becomes clear very quickly. Nobody is actually working with the full picture here. And right now, that gap between what is known and what is assumed is exactly what's keeping this entire situation alive. The claim that Domani may not even be the central issue completely changed the direction of the conversation. Because if he isn't the core focus, then the immediate question becomes unavoidable. Why is his name the one sitting at the center of all this attention? And that contradiction is where the confusion starts multiplying. According to a circulating theory, Domani may have been pulled into a wider situation involving other individuals, meaning the spotlight on him could be a consequence of association rather than sole responsibility. Not as the only figure involved, but as one of several connected points in a much larger chain. Nothing about this is confirmed, but the idea spread quickly because it actually explains something people couldn't figure out before: why so many details remain unclear, why the narrative feels fragmented, why explanations keep shifting, why everything feels controlled rather than openly discussed. Because when a story doesn't flow cleanly from cause to conclusion, people start assuming there are missing pieces. And that's exactly what's happening here. Then came a shift that made everything even harder to interpret. A short clip surfaced online showing Domani after the situation, not in a courtroom, not in a dramatic setting, just a moment of him being observed casually, moving through space with a calm, composed demeanor. And that's what sparked a new wave of questions. Because instead of looking shaken or visibly overwhelmed, he appeared steady, focused, controlled, almost too composed for what the public believes just happened. And that contrast is what unsettled people. Because in most cases where someone is supposedly at the center of a major legal or personal turning point, emotional signs are expected. But here, the reaction didn't match the narrative being pushed online. And that mismatch created doubt. If the situation was truly as final as described, why doesn't his behavior reflect it? That question started spreading faster than any confirmed detail. And once that question took hold, the entire discussion shifted from what happened to what hasn't been revealed yet. Because at this point, people aren't just reacting to events anymore. They're reacting to uncertainty itself. Then another claim entered the conversation, pushing things even further. According to multiple unverified sources circulating online, the situation involving Domani may still be ongoing in some capacity, not fully resolved, not officially concluded, still in motion behind the scenes. And that completely changes the interpretation of everything being said publicly. Because if the situation isn't actually finished, then phrases like "it's over" or "final decision" may be premature interpretations rather than confirmed outcomes. And that's where the narrative begins to split into two completely opposing realities. One side believes the matter is concluded and being misinterpreted online. The other believes the public is only seeing a partial version of an ongoing process. And right now, there's no verified bridge between the two. Then came a post that added even more complexity. A circulating statement allegedly from someone with legal insight suggested something critical. People are reacting to a moment, not the full process. And that single idea shifted how many began reevaluating everything. Because it implies the public is focusing on the visible outcome while ignoring the steps that led there. And if that's true, then the emotional response online may be built on incomplete context rather than full clarity. Shortly after that, another claim surfaced suggesting that conditions may have been attached to whatever outcome was reached. Not confirmed, not documented publicly, but discussed widely enough to influence perception. And that changes the meaning entirely. Because a conditional outcome is not the same as a final outcome. It suggests flexibility, review, or potential progression depending on unseen factors. And that opens a new layer of uncertainty. Meanwhile, in the real world, Domani hasn't disappeared from visibility entirely. Reports and observations suggest he's still present, still moving, still active. In some form. Not withdrawn, not erased, not completely absent. And that alone conflicts with the idea of a fully closed chapter. Because if something was truly final in the absolute sense, public presence would typically reflect that shift more clearly. But here, the signals don't fully align. And that inconsistency is what keeps the conversation unstable. Then came another wave of reactions, and this time the narrative fractured even further. One group insisted the situation is not over, and people are rushing to conclusions. Another group argued that something serious clearly happened regardless of how it's framed. And a third group believes the biggest issue isn't what happened, but what hasn't been disclosed at all. That third perspective started gaining the most attention because it explains the inconsistency. It explains the confusion. It explains why no single version of events fully holds up under scrutiny. Then an industry voice added a line that intensified everything further. When details aren't fully released, it usually means they can't be. That statement didn't confirm anything, but it implied restriction, boundaries, limits on what can be publicly explained. And that shifted the tone again. Because now the discussion isn't just about missing information. It's about whether some parts of the situation are unable to be discussed openly at all. And that possibility changes everything. Another perspective added a final layer of doubt by pointing out something simple but powerful. Phrases like "goodbye forever" have not been officially confirmed in any structured or verified form, which raises an uncomfortable possibility. That part of the narrative may have been amplified, interpreted, or emotionally exaggerated as it spread. And if even that is true, then the emotional foundation of the entire online reaction may not fully match reality. But despite all of this uncertainty, one thing is consistent across every version of the story: the lack of clarity itself. Because no matter which angle people take, the same gaps remain. No fully confirmed timeline, no unified explanation, no complete disclosure of events. And that absence is exactly what keeps the situation alive. Because when facts are missing, interpretation takes over. And once interpretation takes over, certainty disappears. Right now, the only thing everyone seems to agree on is simple. Something happened, but not everything about it is known. Nothing about this situation feels settled anymore. Just when it looked like the story had reached its peak, another detail surfaced, and it completely shifted the direction again. Because now people are questioning something they thought was already confirmed. The word that started it all, sentenced, might not mean what the internet assumed it meant. And that changes everything. Because according to new claims circulating across multiple sources, what happened in that courtroom may not have been a final judgment at all, not an ending, not a permanent outcome, but part of a process that people misunderstood the moment it leaked online. And if that's even partially true, then the entire emotional reaction, the panic, the assumptions, the phrase "goodbye forever," could be built on a misinterpretation. That's the part hitting people the hardest. Because suddenly, the story isn't as clear as it looked 24 hours ago. One version says everything is finished. Another says nothing is actually complete yet. And right now, nobody can confidently prove which one is real. Then another line started spreading online, and it only made things more confusing. This wasn't the final step. It was the first one people noticed. That single idea flipped the conversation again. Because if this really is just the beginning of a longer process, then what people thought was the conclusion might actually be just the opening chapter. And that raises a much bigger question. What comes next that hasn't been revealed yet? While all of this is unfolding online, something else quietly changed in the background. Domani's presence. Not gone, not erased, but noticeably different, less visible, more controlled. Almost like someone choosing not to move in the spotlight anymore. And that shift is what's making people uneasy. Because if the situation was truly over, you'd expect complete silence or a clear resolution. But instead, there's something in between, something unfinished, something unspoken. And that in-between is where all the uncertainty lives right now. At the same time, the silence from key people in this situation is becoming louder than any statement could be. No full clarification, no confirmed breakdown, no direct explanation that ties everything together. And in the absence of answers, theories are filling the gap. Some people believe the entire situation has been exaggerated by social media. Others are convinced something serious did happen, but the full truth is being held back. And a third group thinks what? As being discussed publicly is only a small piece of a much larger picture. That's why the internet feels split in every direction. But one thing everyone agrees on is this: something doesn't add up yet. Not fully. And until those missing pieces are revealed, every update, every rumor, every claim, every silence keeps adding more pressure to a story that refuses to settle. Because right now, this doesn't feel like an ending. It feels like a pause before something else. And nobody knows what that something else is going to be. So the real question is what people think happened anymore. It's what hasn't been said yet. Because in situations like this, the loudest moments are never the final ones. They're usually just the beginning of the part nobody saw coming.